My name's Guy Kesterman. I've been a professional bike and kit tester for over 25 years. And today, this is my tech talk round on Merida's OneSixty 8000. A seriously radical bike that's loaded with a whole ton of interesting features. And I'm going to talk through those and the way they affect the ride. So the frame is full carbon fibre with some really clean lines running from that big headstock right the way down to the rear wheel net there. And the really interesting thing is that both the 160 and the 140 bikes from Merida use the same frame set. The only difference is the stroke of that rear shock there, and the fact that on the 140 stock bikes you get an inline shock, whereas on the 160 bikes, like here, you get a piggyback shock. So by changing the travel on the shock and by changing the stroke on the fork, you can actually turn this 160 into the 140 bike. The other big feature, or lack of feature to be exact, is that down here, there's no rear pivot. It's a flex stay design, which is something you normally only see on kind of 100 to 120 mil travel bikes. But actually, the way Merida have created the kinematic and placed the linkages on this, there's actually less flex in the seat stay on this bike than there is on their 100 mil cross-country race bikes. So it gets you a lighter, gets you a more reliable, and in this case, a really well balanced suspension system there with basically less hassle going on. And then moving into the rest of the suspension system, you've got this upright linkage here, and then another little Y linkage that drives the shock. And you can see on these 2 points here, you've got a 27.5 setting and a 29er setting. Obviously that relates to the rear wheel. So on the extra short and medium bikes, you get a 27.5 or mullet rear wheel, whereas on the large and extra large bikes, this is a large here, you get 29er both ends, and that changes the effective chainstay length by from 434 to 438 mil. And that's the only geometry change on the bike. Apart from that, everything else is static. You've got a 64-degree head angle, and then a really radical 79-degree seat angle. I mean, that's proper steep, and it really helps on steep climbs, gets you forward over the front of the bike and really helps you power up those verts. And that's particularly significant because the reach is really long on this for a standard production bike. So 470 mil in a medium, but this large is 498 mil in reach. So without that steep seat tube, the bike would be a long way out in front of you and a lot harder to control when you're on steep climbs. Not that, steep climbing is a priority on this bike, but efficient pedaling for enduro use, or just if you haven't got an uplift, scrambling back to the top of the descent, that's really helpful, having that brilliant, but it's just a naturally poised climbing position. It's what we used to call on the rivet, when you had to slide right forward onto the nose of the saddle and pretty much ream yourself to get the appropriate traction. This just sets it up automatically for you. And as well as the radical geometry and the radical suspension system, there's some really neat detailing going on. Well, headset control routing is neat in terms of aesthetics, but it's not so neat if you're a mechanic working on it. But that's a nice little touch there. It comes with this tool wrap and an inner tube already on there. We've already talked about the different shock lengths giving different travels, and also if you change from mullet to 29er, that changes rear wheel travel from 162 mil to 171 mil if you run the smaller back wheel in there. Then you've got the Fidlock magnetic bottle cage placement down there. And you've even got a service port here if you decide to use an 8-pins internal dropper post like Lightville do. So you really are covered for all bases here. Anyway, you have got a full ISCG chain guide mount. It's got an MRP fitted as standard. You can see it's got a skid plate underneath. It's actually a while since I've seen a full chain guide on a bike. Then you've got this mudguard bolted in here to protect the lower pivot and also the access point for the controls coming out of the main frame and into the chainstays. That does tend to work as a bit of a mud shelf. You get a whole ton of crap collecting there when you're riding in filthy conditions, but at least it's easy to clean off and it stopped it getting to the bearings, and you can add an extended mud hugger onto here if you want to. Another thing that's harder to spot is you've actually got well, it's a cable. Merida say it's a cable access port underneath there, but if you pull this out, you can actually move and use storage all the way up inside the down tube, kind of like a prison pocket, hidden storage system on there, if you will, but obviously not as easy to get to as something in the top. But it means that Merida can use a slimmer tube, which gives the bike a kind of more compliant, more ductile. I called it friendly in the live ride video, but it's just a really nice balance of stiff enough to be accurate, but flowing enough to really help kind of preserve grip, make you less fatigued. It is, together with how well they've judged the spring in this FlexStay back end, it really, really is a lovely bike to ride. So do make sure you watch that live ride video as well, because that's where I'm really going deep on, obviously how the bike performs on the trail while I'm actually riding it. In terms of spec, this is SRAM X1 carbon fiber chainset, and then you've got GX axis gears on there. I mean, it's not Eagle transmission, it's not the latest setup, because obviously the GX version of that isn't out yet, but you do get a SRAM style UDH hanger on there. So if you did want it to upgrade it to Eagle transmission later on, that isn't going to be an issue. You've got race face turbine R wheels, front and rear, relatively light but properly tough alloy wheel set with these massive oversized Volt hubs in there, keeping it nice and stiff. And actually, the early ones were a bit sketchy, but that was years ago, and all the long-term wheels I've had running race face hubs have actually been really, really reliable recently. And then this will be a real bonus for the people who are going to ride this bike to full effect. You've got Minion DHR2, again, standard fit on the back, 29.2.4, yeah, whatever, standard. 3X, 3C, Max Terra, good, nice balance of grip and, speed, but then double down. So, properly reinforced heavyweight carcass on this tyre, and if you go up front, it's the same on the Assegai up front. So again, Assegai is pretty much the benchmark for traction control. But in this case, not only are you getting a max grip rubber compound, so super sticky, but again, double down carcass. And there are so many enduro bikes or enduro style bikes that, I guess for reasons of weight, or I don't think there's any difference in price. I can't imagine it's massive. But they just throw away a lot of the composure, control, and sort of survivability you could get from the bike, and inevitably mean most riders are going to upgrade by fitting lightweight, skimpy tyres that really aren't up to the task. So it's great to see that Merida have properly committed to heavyweight, heavily damped rubber, and it really does anchor what's otherwise quite an agile and springy ride. It's great. It's a very kind of playful top, but then these super grippy, super hench tyres that can run at low pressures. You've no worries about burping, splitting or battering. And also, the other thing I want to say is those race face turbine R wheels actually come with a lifetime warranty as well. So, from the forks and shock down, this bike is properly designed to take some hammer. Don't know why I said forks and shock down, because you've got nothing less than a RockShox Zeb in limited spec. So you've got Charger 3 damper, you've got the Buttercup pucks in the bottom there, 170mm of travel with full independent high and low speed compression control. And then here you've got probably one of my favourite shocks at the moment, which therefore means ever, the RockShox Super Deluxe Ultimate Rear Shock with this super subtle but super effective low speed compression dial on there, which really lets you dial in how you like the bike to ride. Then moving to the rest of the spec, I always wonder why people do this, but it works, so no problems. Didn't have any bike point issues with the XT brakes on this. And you get nice big rotors for plenty of power, and then you get a Merida bar and stem in a totally appropriate size and shape. And then you get a Merida saddle, and then I'm going to flip the bike around. You can see a really interesting bit of spec on this bike, and that is this currently unique to Merida dropper post mechanism. So you've got a little locking cam on there, and then you've got plus or minus adjustment with an Allen key in this hole, and that lets you change the stroke anywhere you want between 230mm for the tallest, longest legged riders down to 30mm. I mean, not sure why you'd want that, but if you only want a tiny amount of stroke, basically hugely adjustable stroke length within the standard frame, and it doesn't affect the operation in any way. You've got a standard Shimano lever out the front here, and that's a really, really smart bit of customizable functionality. And the only real downside is that does look a bit of a lump on the side, but you know, you've got a nice little window so you can see the mechanism inside if you like to see how your things on your bike work. And then finally, coming down to the rear brake actually sits on a radiator that's built into the mount, because the mount actually comes off, because obviously you've got a flex stay here. They've actually used a really long mount, so they've taken the opportunity to fit some heat dissipation fins in there as well. I mean, I haven't got a sense long enough around here to test that out, but together with the Ice Tech pads as well, it's just a nice bit of detailed thinking on the bike, and the whole bike is just really, really interesting. I mean, Merida, one of the largest manufacturers in the world, you kind of forgive them for just doing something a bit paint by numbers, but not only like the nanomatrix carbon they use, a lot of the construction techniques inside, they have what they call the anti-wrinkle system, but there's so much they've done differently with this bike, whether it's that suspension stroke changeable seat post, the little heat radiator on the rear brake, the fact that they've gone for fidlock rather than a standard bolted setup, the duality of the frame, the fact that it is a 160 or a 140 bike, depending on how you want to run it. There's just a really, really impressive amount of thought in this machine. And one thing I haven't talked about, which is always a big reason to look at Merida, is the fact this bike is top value. You know, you've got absolute premium spec suspension on there, great wheel and tyre package, really, really well detailed frame. It's a reasonable weight. It's 15.3 kilos without pedals for this bike, but it's, well, until all the pricing went a bit weird recently with everybody having sales, this was definitely noticeably better value than all the big brands, I would say, and also a lot of the online brands as well. And that's despite the fact you get a really good warranty on it. This frame is covered up to Cat 5 riding, which means enduro racing, bike park, and even downhill use, which is surprisingly rare in the enduro category. A lot of people stop at Cat 4, so it is genuinely designed to ride hard, not just in terms of the features, but also its inherent strength and toughness. So that's all the really interesting details behind this Merida 160 8000. But what really matters is how well this bike rides on the trail. So make sure you click the link at the end of this video to see my live ride review as I take it to one of my secret test trails and properly explore what all these features translate to in terms of how well it copes on the trails. And, you know, spoiler alert, this is one of the best enduro bikes I've ridden. But for now, massive thanks to Merida UK for supporting this video. Thanks to Giro Cycling UK. Thanks to PT's Products. Thanks to Enduro Bearings. Thanks to Talk Nutrition. Thanks to Crud XL Fenders for keeping my face clean for another season. Thanks to Hebtroco as well. And as always, huge thanks to my Patreon subscribers who pledge every month, and that means I can spend a lot more time talking to a GoPro about bikes alongside my other testing work for magazines and websites. And I fully understand if you can't afford to support me on Patreon. It is only a small amount, but a small amount counts a lot at the moment, right? So, but clicking for subscriptions, notifications, and giving this video a thumbs up like, and sharing Guykes TV amongst your friends makes a massive difference to the continued growth of the channel. But for now, thanks for watching. I've been Guy Kestevan on Guykes TV, talking about the Merida, seriously radical, super versatile, and excellent value 160 8000.